always like to start and ask the audience, how many of you are not from Louisiana? A fair number. That's interesting. Well, you probably would not be allowed to give this talk because you're not from here. And as you heard, I am not from Baton Rouge, so I'm not even from here, but I am from Louisiana in the cold north of Shreveport. And a lot of people don't know this, that in Louisiana, we have the highest percentage of native-born people of any state in the Union, and it's well over 75% of the people are native-born Louisianians. That is a real positive, but it's also a big negative, that we do not attract people from outside to come in to Louisiana. You know that we're always given grades on various and sundry means and methods to rate states about how we do, and we tend to get the big F, the F rating rather than an A or a B, as we may have all gotten in school. But I want to submit to you that there are 7 Fs that we excel at, and they're basic, but I think they're fundamentally very important. Number 1 is faith. Louisiana is a very faith-based state, very Judeo-Christian. Family, very family-oriented. Families are very tight here. Friends. And the other 3 are fellowship, festivals, food, and fun. But those F's we really do excel in. What I'm going to talk with you about today is the concern I have that we're not growing. The paper recently published our growth, and I kind of carved this out just within the last, say, week or so. And our state's population as of 2021 was at the almost identical level in body count as 2013. So over 8 years, we've had virtually no growth. That's with births and deaths, moves ins, moves outs, and whatever. What I'm going to talk to you about is a talk I gave well over 35 years ago. And I've dusted it off and kind of upgraded it, at least some of the language, because some of the languages even, you have to use more contemporary language today. But the 3 E's for Louisiana are very basic. It's the economy, the environment, and education. And when you talk about economy, and I'm going to go each one of these, you talk about fiscal and tax policy. What needs to be done to improve that situation? In the environment here, I'm going to definitely talk about the ecology, but let's also talk about the legal environment, the health care environment, and the crime. And then education. I'm going to touch on all of those. But there's some things that we need to talk about attitudinally in our state. Being a native Louisianian, I can say this. Those of you who are not, you'd get castigated for saying this. But since I grew up here, we have in Louisiana an entitlement culture. And it dates back generations. It didn't just happen yesterday. It's been around for generations. In the past, when you or I or anyone else needed support and assistance, where did we go? We went to our family. We went to our neighbors. We went to our friends. We went to our church. We went to social and civic organizations. We didn't go to the government. That's very different today. It's a very different dynamic. We have in Louisiana very much a something for nothing type of a mentality. Get what you can. That's that get what you can philosophy. We like free stuff, we like special deals, and we like favors. And we have an independent attitude. We are very unique. We are very independent, but we're quite resistant to rules, to laws, to regulations, and our views on alcohol and controlled substances, litter, trash, and the maintenance of private and public property are very different than what you may see in other places. We come up with solutions in many cases, but they're usually Band-Aid. They're usually short-term solutions, and we do only what's politically expedient. We're rarely bold in doing something. We need to avoid crisis management. Instead of reacting, we need to act and take steps. And our lack of respect for human life, the crime rate, is truly alarming. Now, can we say this about other states? There's no doubt. But we live here. And we have to face this. We can't say, well, they're just as bad as we are. That's not good enough for our population. We deserve better than that. So I'm going to go through these 3 E's kind of rapidly. I hope I don't put anybody to sleep. I can be kind of clinical about this stuff. I'll try and laugh a little, although at times I want to cry when I go over these things, because these are things we've talked about. These are not going to be, you say, oh, this is a great revelation. These are going to say, but hadn't we talked about this before? Yeah, we did 35 years ago, 40 years ago. We did. We've done this. Well, let's talk about taxation and fiscal policy. More, will this put you to sleep? But that's how you attract, and that's how you maintain and keep businesses and industries here, and how you encourage and invite diversification. And frankly, it's how you keep young people here. We need to seek and maintain our human resource talent in this state and attract equity capital here. The population issue that I just mentioned to you shows that we're not really doing well. And we're losing a lot of our young people who not only go out of state to go to school, but they go out of state to find their career opportunities. Let's talk about the taxation issues. Well, as you know, we have an income tax and we have a sales tax. At the state level I'm talking about, even though at the local levels we also have sales taxes. But our income and sales tax is 80% of all taxes collected, or sales and income. 80% of all taxes that we assess, and 60% of all state revenues, excluding federal. Now, you take the federal revenues out because the federal revenues come to the state and they're already dedicated to certain programs to do certain things. On the income side, the corporate and personal, we've had some recent changes. So if you went to the polls and voted for the amendment that passed, the one amendment that did pass, it took the deductibility out of the Constitution, the requirement for the deductibility of your federal income tax on your state income tax return. You said, well, that's terrible. That's going to raise my taxes. No, it would have if they didn't change the rate at the same time. So the rate came down. So we now have a lower income tax rate for corporations and for individuals because they no longer can deduct their federal income tax. And I think that was a good first step. It was a good move. This has been talked about for years, but it was locked in our Constitution. Sales and use tax, that constitutional amendment did not pass. And this was one that was quite critical to our state. It dealt with centralizing the collection of sales tax. If you're a business person and you do business in multiple parishes, if you were in another state and you did business in multiple counties, you file one return. One return to one location to one place. And they cover the filing, the payment, the submission, the audit, and any appeals at that one location and one spot. In Louisiana, we have 66 taxing districts. We only have 64 parishes. How did that happen? But that's the way we have it. Our state rate right now is 4.45%. In Baton Rouge, we have 5.5, so we're at 9.95 when we buy those things that are subject to sales tax. I'll get to that in a minute. The fact that that amendment did not pass is very disappointing, but it's going to come back. It's going to come back again, and hopefully it'll be on the ballot again this fall when a lot more people will vote in a federal election. Well, you say, well, what other states do what we do? Only one has the non-centralization of sales tax. And it's a whacked out state in the West, which I'll leave nameless. But they do hug trees. The franchise tax is another tax. It affects corporations and now certain LLCs that are taxed as corporations. It's an existence tax. It's one of the worst taxes you can possibly have, and we have it in Louisiana. They did change slightly, the legislature, a little bit to bring it down a very, very tiny bit, but that's not what needs to happen. If you want to get a corporate headquarters here, you will never get one here with that tax because it taxes wealth. It taxes retained earnings. If you look at a balance sheet and you see common stock and equity on there, it taxes that. Years ago, we used to tax the debt to boot, but we got that off. But it really needs to go away. The inventory tax. Those of you in business that have inventories, you get taxed on your inventory. Suppose we started taxing everybody for oxygen. An inventory is just like oxygen to a business. You have to have inventory to do business. We tax it. If it's not moving, we're taxing it. If it's on your lot, we're taxing it. And money stays at the local level, which is good, but it doesn't need to be taxed. Property taxes in general. Well, as you know, we're very proud of the fact that we have some of the lowest property taxes in America. And we might look and see why we have some of the problems we have because of that. I'll get to that when I talk about the homestead exemption. The Holy Grail. That's like, throwing a Bible out a window when you talk about the homestead exemption. What are our concerns? What should we really be worried about? Well, at my age, I'm not worried about too much stuff at all. I don't know how much time I have left. But those of you who are a lot younger, you better be concerned about our unfunded pension liability in the state of Louisiana. We have 4 state retirement plans that are unfunded to the tune of significant dollars, multi-billions of dollars. And too much of our state budget is now dedicated to debt service for those particular obligations. So what needs to happen? Well, what businesses have done routinely over the last 30 years. At the company I worked for 45 years, in 1985, you can do the math how long ago that was, we got rid of our defined benefit plan and went to a defined contribution plan. Well, this needs to happen sooner rather than later. But this is not to say, the state employees, we're gonna really shaft them on this. It's something you would transition out of to be sure that you're fair with all of the employees of the state, whether they be teachers or just state employees. But it has to happen. This debt will continue to rise and never be funded properly, and it requires debt service to meet that. State roads and bridges. I'm learning a lot about bridges these days. With our Mississippi River Bridge District, but the backlog of just repair work alone on roads and bridges, over $15 billion. And then there's another list of new stuff that we want in terms of new bridges, interstate widenings, and other highways, $15 billion more. A lot of our current state gasoline tax, which is very, very low compared to other states, goes to pay administrative costs and expenses. And one of the good steps that happened last year in the legislature is the legislature dedicated or allocated a portion of the current vehicle sales tax. So when you or I buy a truck or a car and there's a sales tax associated with that, some of that is going to be moved off to the side, up to $300 million a year by the state, and it's going to be dedicated to roads and bridges, which was a real positive move. Is it enough? No. You might have heard 2 days ago, the governor has announced and recommended to the legislature that some of the one-time money that is coming to the state from the feds due to COVID and all the CARE Act and et cetera, that $500 million would go for the new Mississippi River Bridge that we're working on right now. That's very exciting, but the legislature may have some different ideas. So if you would like to see this become a reality, contact our local legislators and any legislator that you know in the House and the Senate and encourage them that this is a good idea to fund this bridge. We still have state subsidies for local government officials like firemen, police, sheriffs, etc. I'm not against that. What I'm for is let's fund it at the parish level, at the local level, and not have that subsidy have to come from the state. In other words, shift the control of taxes from the state back to the locals the way it used to be before the '74 Constitution. When I first did this talk, they said the 3 E's, well, it should have been the 2 E's, and they were talking about our former governor, Edwin Edwards, the EE. And I said, no, this has nothing to do with that governor who was there during the '74 Constitution when we did that. But we always want to be like Texas, don't we? We talk about Texas a lot because our neighboring state, and they've done so many really neat and innovative things, and we always talk about Florida. Now, the reason we talk about those two is because neither one of those states have an income tax. They have no income tax. But people pay taxes. They pay different taxes. They definitely pay tax. They think, it's an oasis of no taxes. No, they pay it at the local level. It stays at the local level, and they have very good schools and very good roads and all the other good things that we yearn for. So it's kind of like me seeing a young athlete, and he's fit and trim, he eats properly, watches his diet, he watches his nutrition. I say, I'm going to be like him. But my choice is I go lay on the couch, get a beer, and a sack of Fritos. And I say, I'm going to be like him. It's not going to work. And we continually do that when we look at Texas and say, we're going to be like them, and we do something totally different or polar opposite from what they do. Well, let's talk about the Holy Grail, the homestead exemption. How many people remember what it was in 1974 when the Constitution was passed? $30,000. That didn't last long. 2 years later, it went to 50. And 4 years after that, by 1980, it was at 75, and it's been at 75 since. Every effort when people talk about, hey, maybe we ought to lower it, someone else says, well, maybe we ought to raise it and pay even less in taxes because we're a poor state. And we can have to get our money from some other sources other than the homestead. Okay. Well, every study that we've ever had, and we've had dozens of them, because I've served on study groups, study commissions, I've been a commissioner, a committee member, or this or that. We've interviewed state heads, governors, all these folks, and every one of them say, reduce the homestead exemption. Keep the money locally. Keep the money locally. There would have to be a trade-off with state money, but there's a trade. You shift taxation from the state level back to the parish level. So that's something that's been highly recommended by every study, every commission that's been out there. Recently, the governor had reduced the industrial tax exemption, which is a 10-year exemption, from 100% of the qualifying amount to 80%. And then he also put the decision-making at the local level. I think all of those things were good. I'd like to see it to go back to 100% and do this. Very innovative and very creative. A lot of people don't like this in some of the business and industries because they like it where they want some certainty. Well, this gives certainty. Is take the school board millages, whatever that is in parish A, B, or C, East Baton Rouge, whatever parish you live in, the school board millages, the homestead exemption doesn't apply to it, and it doesn't apply to the ITEP. So those monies are guaranteed to go to those school boards. That would be a huge benefit to the school systems all over the state, so that no longer would you be worried about ITEP taking money away from schools or the homestead exemption taking away from schools. The sales tax, I mentioned it earlier, and the rate it's at. In 1974, we were at 3%. Well, now we're at 4.45. And as you know, we were up as high as 5 just not too long ago. What is the problem with the sales tax? The problem is it doesn't cover enough stuff, and so the rate has to be high. It covers a limited amount of things that are taxable because of exemptions and exclusions. We need to review the exemptions and exclusions. We have too many of them. And then at the rate here, if you broaden your tax base, you can lower the rate. The lower you do it properly, you could lower the rate to 2. And then you'd add whatever the parish tax is to those same things, assuming that they were taxable. I mentioned earlier about the income tax and how it was very favorable to take the deductibility of the federal income tax off the table. Well, that's done. But you could also do something with federal itemized deductions, not allow them except charitable contributions. Let charitable contributions stay as a deductible item on your state income tax return to continue to encourage philanthropy and support for nonprofits, because that is vitally needed, and people do it a lot freer when they know they're getting not only a federal deduction for it on the itemized level, but also a state deduction for it. Last, it's that corporate franchise tax, that tax on accumulated wealth of businesses and stock ownership. That needs to go away. We need to eliminate the sales and use tax on utilities for businesses. You may not know, that's still out there. Businesses are paying an added 2% on their utilities. So what do? Tell them to turn their lights off, cut off the machinery, can't produce anymore? That's a 2% surcharge that is not happening in other states. And then phase out the inventory tax. Now, there are a lot of parishes, rural parishes in this state. This would have to be a major transition for them because they get so much from businesses on inventory. They would have to have time to make that work. And we need to review and determine what was the purpose for all of the constitutional and statutory dedications we have built into the Constitution, built into statutes of revenues. They're dedicated over here, over there. We need to look at those things very carefully. For diversification of our businesses, it's critically that we develop our natural resources, our parks, campgrounds, lakes, streams, rivers, manufacturing. We've got chemical, forest products, ships, alternative energy, oil and natural gas, seafood processing, and high tech. We need more research, but it's got to be coordinated with our universities and medical centers at the agricultural, scientific, and medical level. I'm going to talk very briefly about the environment, the ecology. Who doesn't want clean air and clean water? You're going to get an executive to move his plant here and he say, oh, by the way, we have very nasty water and we don't have any clean air. In fact, we'd like you to help mess it up further in the process. That's not a real good selling point. But we do have areas where we don't have good air and water, and it needs attention. We need better control and monitoring of waste products that we have. Hazardous, nuclear, medical, solid, litter, sewer, recycling, all of those things. The state standards need to be reasonable, fair, achievable, and measured and reported regularly. And develops plans to improve every year. In other words, if you got to here, what's the improvement going to be next year? So that we're in constant improvement all of the time. The legal environment. I'm a closet lawyer. Nobody knows that. Very few people know I went to law school. And people laugh and they say, you went to law school? It must have been a program to just get stupid people out. But I do have a law degree. I quit practicing in '92. I was in the grocery business because people had to eat. We've done in the past civil justice reforms, and they've been very good. They've been very good. We need more of that. We need more tort reform, personal injury reform. The insurance rates are too high in this state, and it's because we have a litigious environment. The attorney advertising. Are you aware that there are groups out there who investigate the use of billboards? I like my billboard, but we have more billboards that have attorney advertising of any other state. It's everywhere. It's like weeds in a garden. They've just proliferated throughout. What do? They promote litigation. The attorney advertising was addressed last year in the legislature on a very, very small level because really this has to be regulated by the Bar Association. But something needs to be done to improve the situation that we don't promote litigation. So more reforms are needed. Well, ask yourself this. Are we a state where all parties can achieve fair and impartial justice in state and local courts? Are we a site where awards by courts are accurate reflection of the damages incurred by the injured party? Are we a site where frivolous lawsuits are tolerated and are encouraged? Are we a site where our state judiciary is objective, unbiased, capable, and competent? By the way, I've never been asked to speak to the Bar Association. And I guess it's because of those questions that nobody wants to ask those questions because maybe they're afraid of the answers. You know, in Louisiana, we elect judges. That's not necessarily uncommon, but it does create a patronage and a constituency environment for justice, where you give judges a candidate to run for office. There creates this beholding type of situation from a judge who's going to be judging people, hopefully, objectively and fairly. Would we consider a merit selection process for judges? Well, what would it give us? Well, you can hopefully get the best and the brightest, and without political influence, patronage, politics in the process. You'd have no elections, no fundraising, no controlled constituency, no favoritism or patronage based on economics, political support, race, or gender. I mean, you would just say these people are eligible. They would have to meet some criteria. The goal would be so Lady Justice is truly blind. You know, Lady Justice is blind. She doesn't know who's the parties in front of her. She's supposed to look at the facts and apply the law to those facts. Healthcare environment. We have a healthcare expert sitting right here, so he could probably give this talk way better than I can. But as an outsider who looks at it, we need to evaluate all of our state services and programs and determine what are we doing and should we be doing those things. Identify the causes of health issues and the costs associated with each one of those things. Utilize our federal funds effectively and efficiently. Make the process more entrepreneurial and results based with better treatments and cost efficient. Be sure that those that truly need actually receive the benefits that are out there. Eliminate the fraud, the waste, and abuse that might be out there. And coordinate all the services and programs and benefits to determine the eligibility and accountability. I actually know that a lot of the state departments do not have integrated computer systems. So if you filed your tax return with the Department of Revenue, but you went over here and applied for a certain benefit, they're not going to go over here because their computer systems do not check to see what you made or if you filed a tax return or anything like that. So they don't have an integrated system to do those things. And finally, just to incent and encourage a better life and lifestyle for all people. With crime, there's one solution. It'll only be reduced when people have a real respect and value for human life and the rights of others. The Greek had a word for that, and it was called metanoia. There needs to be a real change of heart in our society where people understand what human life is. It is a blessing from God, and we should respect it. And people's property should be respected. And we also need a heck of a lot more respect for law enforcement and fund it locally. Third and final item is education. I know I'm getting tight on time, but education should be a top priority in the minds of all of our citizenry. We need to raise the level of consciousness and awareness of what education really means. It doesn't mean you're a smart guy or a dumb person. It means that you've been formally trained in some basics. Raise the level of expectations and change the attitude about education. Strive for excellence and turn away from mediocrity. And avoid costly and unnecessary duplication of faculty, facilities, and curriculum. You know, education requires tremendous competence and dedication and commitment and accountability and rewards for those that achieve. And K through 12 needs to be funded more at the local level with property and sales taxes at the local level. So, it would be easy for me to just enumerate the various things that we need to do at the state level on K through 12, but setting standards is great at the state level. Being ensured that they are followed at the local level should be an accountability issue. We need to get back to basics. Parent-Teacher Association, PTA. That's what I remember when I was in school. That's now disjoint. They've got the parents over here, we've got the teachers over there, we've got the administrators over here, and I'm not sure they've ever been in the same room together. I'm not sure they talk with one another these days. Because education is required for proper adult development and preparedness for active participation in today's world, for active participation in our society, active participation in our world today. Education is critical, and we've got to raise the level of awareness, consciousness, and make it a bigger priority in our state. And throwing dollars at it doesn't really solve the problem. It really is done through accountability. On the higher ed front, we have too many four-year institutions. I know this is heresy. If you went to one of these other schools that are outside, we have too many four-year schools. We do, as a state our size. I would advocate we take some of those and convert them to two-year schools or junior colleges or feeder colleges and or community colleges in some case. We need to control and restrict their curriculum to avoid duplication. I mean, we have 2 law schools in Baton Rouge. That's pretty amazing to me that we would have that. We have 4 in the state of Louisiana. 2 are private, so you can't do anything about that. But we have 4 law schools in the state of Louisiana. That's pretty amazing to me. So graduation rates must improve, or funding should be reduced or eliminated. I mean, and there should be objective criteria to be determined. Okay, I've thrown a lot at you. You're probably saying I'm going to go outside and go to the nearest bar and get a shot of whiskey because it's hopeless. No, having been raised Catholic myself, St. Jude was always very close to me for hopeless causes, so I keep St. Jude nearby. I have him on speed dial, as a matter of fact. This is what we need to conclude with. We just need a plan, a comprehensive reform plan. We need systemic and structural, constitutional and statutory changes. It's all fixable stuff. All of these, they're being done in other states. They're fixable things. We need to place policy over politics and be disciplined and focused to succeed. That's all. It's like an athlete. They're disciplined and they're focused, and they're going to succeed. We've got to embrace best practices over political influence or favored groups or favored industries or favored businesses or labor unions or coalitions or caucuses. That's not going to solve our problem. We need to look at one another as people and say, how are we going to solve the problem and make it better? And lastly, we just need a better attitude. A better attitude and focus, and we got to be willing to make the sacrifices to improve and make the substantive changes that we need to make now, but particularly for future generations. So with that, I want to tell you, I'm not moving. I'm not going to Florida. I'm not going to Texas where they have no income tax. I'm going to stay here and battle it out with you. And we're going to see change. Even if I give this speech another 40 years from now, it'll probably be the same speech, because I do believe in faith, and I do believe in family, and our other 5 F's that we're good at. And it makes me proud to be a Louisianian, but I also am jealous that we aren't a better people that take the bull by the horns and do the steps and take the steps necessary. So with that said, I can open it up for questions. I know we're close to dismissal here. And if you have a question about the bridge, I'll give you as much as I know about the bridge. Yes, sir.
Have you thought about running for governor?
My wife, who is here, told me about 30 years ago, she says, you know, you're going to run for governor. You're going to win. You're moving to the mansion. I'm staying here. Because we're at the same house we've been at 30 years ago. And I believed her. I know her well enough that you're right, that she's right, that I would be at the mansion and I'd be commuting back to my house. Yes?
What about, you're talking about moving stuff to the parishes that would help fund education, but what about the rural parishes that just don't have the tax base to be able to do that?
There are ways to do subsidies for those parishes, because some of the parishes are just very sparsely populated. They don't have the businesses and industries there and to accommodate them, but they would have to take some steps themselves. I've advocated that some parishes need to merge. Now, to do that, you won't really do it by merging into one parish. You do it through a cooperative endeavor agreement where they have one district judge, one DA, one sheriff, and you do that and reduce some of their built-in bureaucracy, because even though they're allowed to have that, is it a need that they would have to have in a sparsely populated? So there's things that could be done to lower their cost of operation in their parishes by collaborating with adjoining parishes in that area. This, you know, some people would say that's heresy, you know, that my grandparents grew up in that thing and we want to keep it the same. Well, you're going to keep it the same, it's going to be pretty bad. It's going to be pretty bad. You're not going to see people want to go back there to live. And we're seeing that particularly in North Louisiana. I'm from North Louisiana. I've driven through all of that area. I used to visit grocery stores up there all the time. And I was stunned to see how sparsely populated, how far you would drive between town to town. And there are very few cities up there. And even there, they're struggling to meet their needs going forward. So it's not an easy fix, but it's very doable. But it's going to take sacrifice. It's going to take commitment. It's going to be like rebuilding a football program. I wonder who's got one in Baton Rouge and now one in New Orleans. Are going to have to rebuild the program, but they're going to do it. They're going to say, hey, stick with us. We're going to be better in the next year. We'll be really good in the third year, and by the 5th year, we're going to be unbelievable. And guess what? That's what happens. Well, we're willing to do that on that, but we're not willing to do that in our own societal viewpoint, that we're not willing to make certain sacrifices.
Tell us about the bridge.
Well, the bridge, we have the Capital Area Road and Bridge District. I'm the governor's appointee on that, which is kind of a story in and of itself, because I do have an R behind my name from a political party standpoint, and he has a D. And there was someone else in this role before me, and he resigned, not out of any particular reason, that he was a very busy businessman here, owned a lot of real estate, and he felt he could end up having a conflict. So he stepped down after he was appointed, and I was asked to do it, and I said, you got to be kidding. Me? You think he'll appoint me? And he said, yeah, he will appoint you, and he did. And the governor and I get along very well. He's a very kind man, and I think he sees this as something very needed particularly in the Capital Area region. I said, well, who's on this thing? So I read the legislation. It says 5 parish presidents and the secretary of DOTD and the governor's appointee. And I went, wait a minute. Who's going to run this show? I said, I'm not going to take this role unless, truthfully, I need to be the chair of it. You can't have one of these parish presidents or the secretary of DOTD being the chair of this operation. It really should be the citizen's advocate, which I think that I am. And so they said, well, that's fine, we'll do that. So I'm now the chair of this group and have been for the last 3 years or so. And we're making some progress on doing all what's called the advanced planning. And you say, why do we have to do all this planning? This has been done before. Because of federal money. If you don't do the steps that DOTD kind of outlines to do, and it's cumbersome because a lot of these toll studies or traffic studies or the approval of the river pilots or the Corps of Engineers or all of these various groups that have to get involved, if you don't get up-to-date revised data, you can't go get matching funds from the feds. That's just their rules. That's the way they do things. I don't like it as a business person. When we made decisions, we went and did it and moved on. Well, here you've got to tiptoe through these type of regulations to do that. We are very close to narrowing down to 3 locations for the bridge. That should be in the May-June timeframe from what I've been told from the consultant. We hired a consultant. Was funded by the legislature. There's a pot of dollars that were given to the DOTD exclusively for this project through our district. And we should have this narrowed down. Because the media made a big deal about how we went from 17 back to 20, and they did it out of an abundance of caution to be sure that the elimination of any site was done totally objectively with data. And that's why we know pretty well where the 3 will, did I?
Nope, you're good.
It might have been a gunshot. It was kind of, when you talk about government, you never know what's going on. But truthfully, the elimination of a lot of these sites will go away very quickly once they get through their last little matrix that they're working on. And we'll be down to 3, and it will be 3 stark, real choices. And once we get to 1, it's time to rock. It's time to go get your environmental reviews at the federal level. And now, if we get this $500,000, that opens up a quick federal review because you got funding. When you have funding with the feds, you move to the top of the line for the review of the environmental, and that will be a big deal. Hopefully, we can get the legislature to at least give that $500 million in a fund for this bridge so that we can get through on an expedited fashion the environmental review and hopefully get to see this to happen. One of my fellow commissioners is he's a friend. He's one of the parish presidents, so I'll leave nameless. His wife used to work for our company. He's a great guy, and he's fun to deal with. We done? Oh, so I got to finish this story. So he says, he says, I'll be dead before this thing is done. He says, I'm going to come pick you up and put your big gula in the car and drive you over that bridge when it's done, because we're both going to be around to see it. Thank you very much.